This is JoyNews. Hello and welcome to a special edition of The Pulse this afternoon, coming to you live from our studios here at Kokomlemle, also on your digital terrestrial TV because we are free to air. We're on DSTV channel 421, Go TV channel 144, and this is your home of independent, fearless and credible journalism. It's the 31st of December 2021. That means the final day of the year. There have been ups and downs, but in all this, we've learned to give thanks. I am Emefa Apau, and The Pulse is brought to you by Global Communities Dignilu, affordable, safe sanitation. Remember, we're also streaming live on YouTube and all our social media platforms at JoyNews on TV. You can tweet at us with the hashtag The Pulse. My personal handle, it's Emefa Apau. I'll introduce my guest shortly after the break. Please stay with me. Let's start our year-end review for today, and my guests this afternoon joining me to do justice to everything that has happened this year. My colleagues, Winston Amwa, Arba Kumsin. Winston Amwa is deputy head of our political desk and the Super Morning Show host. Arba Kumsing is JoyNews editor. Manasseh Azuria Wune is with the Fourth Estate, investigative journalist, and of course, Evans Mensah, head of our political desk and host of PM Express, Top Story, and of course, Newsnight as well. Thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to The Pulse. Hello? Okay, I'll rectify that and see if they can all unmute so we can hear them. But we know that the year started with a swearing in of President Nana Akufo-Addo, as president for a second term. Voting to elect Speaker for the 8th Parliament also caused chaos, heated argument and snatching of ballot papers. I bet you all remember that. The situation called for the presence of the military in the chamber unheard of very first time. Perhaps the epic moment was when Tema West MP Carlos Ahinkra snatched the ballot papers whilst counting was ongoing. He was chased, beaten and papers retrieved. We'll get to that, but also we know that the quest to attain majority status in Parliament also saw NPP MPs arriving in the chamber as early as 4 a.m. in the House to occupy the right-hand side of the Speaker as the House prepared to resume sitting that day. Well, the minority laughed at them. There were a lot that happened at the president's presentation of the state of the nation. He also talked about Ghana not importing food anymore. There was a banking sector cleanup costing the country 21 billion Ghana cedis. And the agricultural policies also introduced had enabled abundance of food. That's what we're told. And also he mentioned or highlighted the peace accord issued in Dagbang. Also, there were issues with the politicization of the fight against illegal mining. There were issues about that, which we'll be getting into once my guests are ready. And government's response to COVID-19 pandemic, replicated by the WHO. We know about the Sputnik V controversy, amongst others. A lot happened. Well, former President John Mahama, who also lost the 2020 elections to Nana, filed an election petition at the Supreme Court, seeking to have the results annulled. His lawyers asked that the Supreme Court allows the EC chairperson answer some 12 questions. I bet you remember that as well. Interrogatories, they call them. Then at one point, Mr. Mahama's legal team described the 7-member panel tasked to take a look or hear the election petition case as unfair and then unbalanced, since majority of the judges were appointed by NPP government. That also happened this year. Well, let me go back on Zoom and bringing my colleague Evan Spencer, who is the head of our political desk. Well, he's covered it all, seen it all when it comes to all the stories this year, 2021, and he has perspectives on that. Winston Anwa will also join us, his deputy, the head of the political desk and host of the Super Morning Show. Arba Kumsing, JoyNews editor, will also join us. He's been editing all the stories that came through this year. And then also Manasseh Azuri Awune also. But let's start off with events that happened that night in Parliament.
During the election for Speaker of Parliament in the House on Thursday morning. The statement reads, "My party, the NPP, of course, enjoys a slim majority in Parliament, courtesy the independent candidate from Foreigner. By this arithmetic, the NPP was supposed to occupy the right side of the Speaker in the chamber. When we got to Parliament, the opposition had occupied our seats. We tried to convince and work things out with them, but they declined, whilst almost assaulting the marshals of Parliament. We conceded because of the inauguration ahead of us and sat in their space. Then the Clerk of Parliament announced that the injuncted Asin North MP could not vote by virtue of a court order served on him. After a long heated debate, the NDC still won't yield. Leadership went into conclave and returned with one of the most unfavorable agreements ever, that a clause in the Constitution forbids anyone who isn't qualified to vote in Parliament to vote. If the injuncted MP-elect decides to vote, he suffers the consequences afterwards himself. How ridiculous. What if his vote changes the outcome of the elections before he goes to court? Then we got to voting, and the minority claimed they wouldn't allow any whipping. In other words, no one can show their vote to their whips after voting. Really? Then what's the whip system for? Why then do we have whips? Since the beginning of the Fourth Republic, elections have always been controlled by whips to ensure the members vote on a particular line. It happens everywhere in this world. Asking us not to be whipped sent us all wondering. The MPP did not comply. The clerk ruled that voting could commence after a little back and forth. As the first few MPP members voted, the NDC whip in the person of Muntaka attacked an MPP member and collected his ballot paper from him because he shown it to someone else. A scuffle ensued and he took the ballot box himself and the ballots inside away. After a long wait, balloting recommenced. This time, the same Muntaka took the ballot box and ran off. That someone was showing their ballots whilst John Jinapo and Sam George kicked the box and the voting booth. This act happened 3 times, so leadership had to go into conclave once more. Upon their return, they asked us not to show our votes anymore. I immediately sensed danger, especially when during voting we noticed many skirmishes where some opposition members would cross over into the MPP voting booth to vote there, etc. Looking at the slim margin between us, NPP and NDC, all the NDC had to do was to lure or convince a couple of members of the MPP and carry the day. So I indicated to leadership the dangers in that ruling. After voting and true to my words, the NPP votes counted 130.
I, Nana Adodankwa Akufo-Addo,
do in the name of the Almighty God swear.
Do in the name of the Almighty God swear.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance.
To the Republic of Ghana.
To the Republic of Ghana.
As by law established.
As by law established.
That I will uphold.
That I will uphold.
The sovereignty and integrity of Ghana.
The sovereignty and integrity of Ghana.
And that I will preserve.
And that I will preserve.
Protect.
And
defend.
The
Constitution of the Republic of Ghana.
The Constitution of the Republic of Ghana.
So help me God.
So help me God.
That's how we started the year 2021 after election 2020. Let's go to Zoom now and bringing our editors as we talk about happenings of the year 2021 in review. And Evan Spencer is with us, Winston Anwa is with us, Arba Kumsing also with us, and Manasseh Azuri Awune. Welcome, gentlemen and lady. Hello?
Hello?
Good. I can hear Evan Spencer.
I can hear you.
Yes, I can hear you. Okay, so I'll start with you, Evans. It's okay that we have you first. Interesting. I would want to hear, first off, your topics, top issues for the year 2021. What comes to mind?
I mean, definitely the start of the year with the swearing in and the unprecedented nature of the election of the speaker was a big deal. The whole election of the speaker issue was unprecedented. That obviously is the biggest story of the year for me. Then there's obviously the election petition, which also went on for a while, was also interesting. We've had COVID obviously was a big issue as well. It sort of ran throughout the year.
By COVID, you mean the controversy with the vaccination, Sputnik V vaccine acquisition? Which one exactly when it comes to COVID? Because COVID was in 2020.
Yeah, I mean, we started the year with our third wave. So if you look at COVID, the whole COVID story was just complicated. So we started the year with the third wave. And this was because of the elections primarily. We're told otherwise, but we all know that's what it was. This is the year where we had the executive COVID lawbreakers, where the president and others who had, were supposed to have passed the law, enforcing the law, were all part of a major event that broke the COVID protocols.
Okay.
Of course, we had the issues around the scandal with the Sputnik V issues that came up. That is still outstanding. Parliament, although looked into it, but no decision has been taken yet on the sanctions. So the general issue with the COVID, the back and forth over protocols that have been imposed and our pursuit of the vaccine that we are not getting, that whole COVID story this year was major. I mean, until the further lives have been lost also. I mean, these for me were the three main things that stood out for me this year.
Okay, great. I would wait to take the topics for my other colleagues as well and to hear. I'm sure most of the things you mentioned may run through it, but whilst we wait to get to them, I know you were in Parliament throughout that night, all the way to the inauguration of outdooring or so of Akufo-Addo. But let's start with that night. Really, we've seen what happened recently also before Parliament went on recess. You were there also, at least. We watched you live on TV as you brought us all the happenings with Parker in Parliament. So what's fresh on your mind? Looking at the two issues, starting with that night, 7th January, what do you readily recall, you'd say?
So for me, that night set a tone for what Parliament has become. First time we saw real violence on the floor of Parliament. First time something very unprecedented happened, the military invasion of the floor of Parliament. That was a big deal. That sort of set a tone, and we've seen that throughout the year. It had that tone that was set had followed in the proceedings of Parliament. This December, we've seen it play out again. So, I believe if January 6th into 7th had not happened the way it did, that precedent that was set wouldn't have played out the way we saw it this month. So for me, that was a key thing. It was the setting of the tone that was a key thing. But the substance of it, the real contents of the 6th to 7th, the fact that for the first time, we had an election of a speaker who didn't come from the ranks of the executive government that had just won an election was a big deal. Was really unprecedented in our fourth Republican history and the history of Ghana generally. That for me was key. It was a continuation of what the voters had said they wanted through how they voted in giving each party 137. As in, the expectation was from the elections that the outcome will put the two sides to the table. And so for the first time, we'll have one party taking the door. And then we have the election of the speaker, which further affirmed that. And so we had Aban Babin, who is a very well-known NDC, who had run to be president on the ticket of NDC, being elected, which was a shock to the system because nobody really anticipated that was even possible. Although we still knew that there was a possibility because of 137, but there was an independent candidate who we thought once you throw that in, they definitely carried the day, the MVP. But that didn't happen. That election was for me very fundamental. Those were the things that I recall, and it altered the political history of this country very significant. It was a seismic shift in the way politics is done in Ghana, and this year really, with that beginning of the year, had changed a lot. And I'm pretty sure that in the years to come, a lot will be written about this hang parliament, which is our first, and all the things that it told about our democracy.
Okay. Well, let's take the topics of Winston Amwa. Also, he's joined us. Winston, welcome. If you can hear me, Evans has been outlining what his topics are for 2021. Top issues, what's top on his mind. We've gone through them. We'll be digging deeper into the issues that he's raised. But what are yours?
Well, I can hear you, Ifa. I think my top issue certainly would be the election of a speaker. Now, Evans has talked about how many people were shocked. It was shocking that Alban Suman Akinsport Bag being won. I was in Parliament with Evans, and the analysis we made was that prior to the election of the speaker, prior to the dawn of 7th of January, it was obvious that you had some members of the NPP who were not happy with Professor Aaron Michael Quay, and so that wasn't going to come to me as a shock. You would know that there are some persons who didn't like Professor Michael Quay. There are people who had actually made it public.
We'll dig deeper into that, but first outline the topics for me.
Well, so I'd look at the election of a speaker. I would look at what transpired at the end of this session of Parliament. Would look at the address situation, one that certainly stands out. The fight against Galamsey, we launched, as a country, we launched Operation Halt. And we're launching Operation Halt. And you ask yourself the number of times we've launched a campaign to deal, with Galamsey. It affects the country. Social media getting on board and, starting an advocacy to get the country fixed is something that I have, used in my discussions. And I've said that for once, we've had, the fifth estate of the realm, that's social media being a check even on traditional media. I would take out one other, one of my topics, the whole conversation of a culture of silence. Now, the distinguished personality, that's Sam Jonah, talked about the fact that today many Ghanaians were not willing to speak for fear of being attacked. And for me, that was very instructive. We saw what happened when we had a conversation on the SMS, where we gave feedback to the government about, the free SHS. Yes. And, the response that we got from the executive, that for me is very instructive. And so these issues for me would be my topics. Of course, the vetting of ministers and matters arising is very critical. The probe into the acquisition of or the procurement of COVID-19 vaccines, the Sputnik V vaccines from Sheikh Al Maktoum, and matters arising for me also.
Okay. So that's Winston. I've counted up to what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Up to about 8 issues that is top on Winston's list. And of course, the election of the speaker runs through exactly what Evans also mentioned, the Sputnik V vaccine acquisition. Evans also talked about it when it comes to COVID and issues about Parliament. So like I said, by the time we take the top picks of all the editors, we'll get to know which one is top on the agenda, and then we get to start and delve deeper into it. Let's bring in Araba Kumsing. Hello, Araba. Hello, Araba. You have to unmute if you can hear me, Araba. Well, we'll work the lines and then bringing Araba and Manasseh. But Evans and Winston, so I've seen that at least the political desk, you have almost the same issues when it comes to the top issues for you for 2021. So election of speaker, you mentioned that it was surprising that Alban Bagwing was elected, and there were concerns about the leadership of Professor Michael Quay, amongst others. But that night, both of you extensively reported on happenings in Parliament, events leading to the election of the speaker, amongst others. Looking back on this particular 8th Parliament, how it started and how we've seen the second meeting end, amongst others, do you think that this Parliament will be the same? Is there more to come, Evans?
Yes, definitely there's more to come. What we've seen is just a tip of the iceberg. And I think the tone has been set with, James set the tone. December tells us that the parliamentarians will go whatever length to make sure that the numbers counted. Now, but I did a show in the middle of the year, not the middle, just towards the end of the year, where I was asking the elusive benefits of the hung parliament. And in essence, I was analyzing all the big decisions that Parliament had taken. And we thought after January, what happened with the election of the speaker, that for the first time, the minorities number will count for a lot. And then we saw that it was put to the test for the very first time with the vetting of the ministers. And we saw when some of the appointments were withheld. Kojo Nkrumah and others were withheld. We thought, well, okay, this is the first time we're going to see how this plays out. And then when it came down to a vote, we saw what happened. The MPP side won. That started a certain trend. And then it came to the vote on the finance minister, who had been away ill in the US for a while and returned. That's another big story this year. And we're told by the minority side that they were not going to reject him because of the banking crisis and other things. It was such heated. In fact, for the very first time, we saw clear articulation of dissent among the minority ranks in Parliament. So you had Isaac Adonko, who was going public to challenge his minority leadership to reject the man. That was very new, because you didn't have people, they would privately disagree, but they would come public. But we saw that. And then what happened?
But events after that, have we checked if Isaac Adogo is alive now? Is everything okay between them, especially the minority, you would say? I'm sure you've been checking. Is everything the same?
I have no idea. But that played out in the public. And in the end, Ken Oforiatta was approved. Started a storm of disillusionment and disenchantedness among the rank and file of the NDC. And we saw Sami Jimfi's, posts that targeted Haruna Bruce and the leadership and Alban Bagwing with some vitriolic, powerful incendiary language that was used in describing them in not unpalatable language. For a while, the grassroots of the party were just unhappy with what has happened. And so you began to wonder, so really, what happened to the MPP's, NDC's numbers? How come it's not counting for anything? And it is really on the back of all that we have seen what happened in this. He knew that coming back from that experience, there was no way the party was going to forgive them, at least the rank and file would forgive them, if they didn't held their own on the budget. And so the backbenchers were determined to force the leadership of the minority to do exactly what the party expected, what the grassroots expected, which is why we saw the violence we saw on the floor. And so clearly, if you look at it, the way it's panned out, it is just a tip of the iceberg. And I think I must throw in another story. This was in December, but it's linked. The prosecution of Atoforsi.
Exactly.
And others. For me, further, and I've spoken to a few of the leadership on the minority side who say that and the other NDC people who have been tried will further consolidate their resolve to challenge every single government policy now that comes to the floor. And it makes for a very interesting 2022.
Well, Winston, so you were bringing an interesting perspective about the concerns the majority side had about the previous speaker leading to the election of Alban Babing. I'm sure you can box it in with issues about parliament that you raised and the vetting of ministers. I'm sure you can box all that in terms of what the issues are for you there.
Well, I'm talking about the vetting of members of vetting of ministers. And I think it was obvious that 5 of them had to go to the plenary. The bit about Ken Ofori-Atta, yes, some expected Ken Ofori-Atta to also go to the plenary. That did not happen. I'm not going to really focus on that. But I'll tell you one thing. When it comes to the appointment of ministers and vetting of ministers, lots of things would play in there because now they come from regions, they come from tribes, they have friends in parliament. And so while you may expect the minority to say, we're going to reject these persons, the minority may not reject them, and they may not reject them because, for instance, if I'm friends with you, MFA, and you belong to the other side and you've been nominated as a minister, I wouldn't vote against you because my caucus says I should vote against you. Mind you, that's secret balloting. So it was always something that we expected to happen. Now, you realize that Mavis Howard Kumson, for instance, had the most votes in the House. And you would ask yourself, why would she have the most votes in the House? Well, the answer is very simple. How many female ministers did we have? Okay? And so if you're looking at it, if you're part of the women caucus in Parliament, would you be willing to vote against the Mavis Howard Kumson? When you are actually calling for affirmative action and you're calling for more female members of Parliament, if I'm not sure you want to do that, right? And so, yes, and so that was going to happen. Now, if you are the the Minister for Food and Agriculture, you're coming from the Ashanti region, and you have some members of the NDC MPs in the Ashanti region. Now, this is a man representing the Ashanti region. And the people have talked about, don't vote against it. Because at the end of it all, he's coming to their region, and this is their region, and this man is going to be, a Minister of Food and Agriculture from their region. So I wasn't surprised at all. Now, the bit about, the election of Speaker Michael Quay, and I say, I was there with Evans. We stayed there for a very long time. We had anticipated that by midnight we're going to be done, so we could, come back and, cover the inauguration of President Akufo-Addo, or the swearing in of President Akufo-Addo. One of the things I kept saying was that, look, come again?
Please go ahead. That wasn't me.
Okay, so I'm saying that, look, if you were, and I had said, for instance, that there are certain persons who have gone out publicly. I'm sure many of you have seen a video of the outgoing, chief whip on the majority side talk about his issues with Professor Aaron Michael Quay at a radio station in the Bono region. You have seen, I on the day talked about how if I were Honorable Isiama, who is Member of Parliament for Fomena, this is the man who actually said that my seat be declared vacant and I shouldn't come to Parliament. Well, this is not to say that he was the one who voted against Professor Michael Quay. I do not know who voted against him, but it was expected that, look, some people had edged to Professor Michael Quay. I think the government itself shot themselves in the foot when they presented Professor Michael Quay. And today, the government would accept that, look, they made a mistake in deciding to actually present Professor Michael Quay. If they had presented another candidate and they knew, and the government knows the person they had promised they were going to make speaker, if that person had been presented, they wouldn't have gone through these problems. At the end of it all, democracy won, because then today we're talking about, for the first time in the Fourth Republic, having a Speaker of Parliament coming from, a different political party.
Okay.
We have seen what has happened. I think that what we are seeing is good for our democracy. Yes, the fight may not be good, but it's also part of the democratic process.
But you had Evans,
So
there's more to come. There's more to come. You talked about the fight not being good, but it appears this is what we bargained for.
Well, without discussing issues that we discussed off air, I think we all had anticipated these things. We knew these things were going to happen. I think that, look, at the end of it all, parliamentary democracy is such that, our democracy is such that a lot of things will be said. You hear them saying there's more to come, we're going to challenge every decision. But at the end of it all, they would make peace. Look, sometimes it's very important, and it's very important that the government realizes that this is not the 169, 106 kind of parliament, and they have to consult. So if you have to consult, if you have to build consensus, this is just a sign to get you to realize that you just cannot bulldoze your way as you used to do in the past. So the more we expect to come would be that eventually a lot of decisions, and I take you to this. Now, when John Dramani Mahama addressed the press on the 8th of December, he said he believes the NDC had one majority in Parliament. And he said with majority in Parliament, they could elect a speaker and take a lot of decisions. We have seen the meeting. John Dramani Mahama has talked about the meeting with Gabi Asare-Ochodako. He's talked about a possible meeting with the President of the Republic of Ghana. I think this is something that is going to happen. I know other efforts that have been put in place to ensure that this is done. And when this is done, we're going to get to a level where you have the two, persons, that's President Akufo-Addo and former President John Dramani Mahama, engaging on a regular basis, because the president must realize you cannot push your way through Parliament all the time. You cannot bring your ministers of state to Parliament all the time to transact parliamentary business. The era of we have the numbers is over, and consensus building is the way to go. And that's why people have actually said that, the majority leader, he's talked about how he, facilitated meetings between the executive and Parliament. But I think we've reached a stage where the majority leader, fantastic parliamentarian, one who has institutional memory, one who knows the rules of Parliament. But Oseche Mensah must realize one thing. This is not 2017.
Yeah.
This is 2021. This is not 169, 106. It's 138, 137. You have ministers of state who are members of Parliament. Do not pretend that you can bulldoze your way through. You would lose. And if they subject everything to a vote, you will be the bad person, and you will be told in your era as majority leader, everything had to go through,
a vote.
voting.
Okay,
So
let's bring in Arba Winston. Let's bring in Arba. There are a number of issues that you've all raised that hopefully we can exhaust before our time is up. Arba, you got the opportunity to edit almost all the stories that came through in the year 2021. Which one of them stands out for you?
Obviously, MFA, I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, we can hear you.
Good. So obviously the chaos that erupted on the floor of Parliament was a major highlight. Already Winston and Evans have spoken at length about it, so I won't go too much into that. We all know that it was a shameful incident. We criticized the MPs for that. They justified it. And of course, you can't forget Carlos Ahenkora, snatching the ballot box in Parliament. What made this even more shameful was the fact that what was playing out on the floor of Parliament, this was what the MPs themselves had been advising their constituents not to do. And to see them engaging in that same conduct was, very reprehensible and, shameful. But MFR, you also recall that, similar chaos erupted in America, at the Capitol Hill, America, the bastion of democracy.
Yeah.
We saw Republicans.
Is that our excuse? Is that our excuse?
That's not our excuse, no. But that
Okay.
was another in January. I mean, if you're casting our minds back, that happened in America as well. Of course, that was also widely condemned. But for me, I think that my highlight January this year was schools preparing to open and parents expressing concern about their children or wards getting contracted with the COVID, because schools had been closed for 10 months up until then. We saw many of the school owners and operators complaining about losing money and the need to sort of revive the operations. And so that for me was a highlight, because COVID affected everyone, and to see how parents were concerned about how children could go back to school, they needed to be educated, but at the risk of contracting the disease or not. That was a major highlight for me.
Okay, so for you, issues about Parliament and then COVID. COVID runs through all the issues. We'll talk about it because we're experiencing a fourth wave as we speak, because Evans raised it, you have, and then also Winston has raised it. Issues also about the election petition. Evans, you raised the election petition issues. Winston touched on it a little bit, but most people can't stop talking about that speech that was delivered by the former president, John Mahama, after that verdict was given by the Supreme Court. And also, you remember the Judicial Service and that statement, or is it a letter or a warning to the media before that verdict was issued. So, election petition, let's talk about it briefly since you raised it, Evans. Is Evans there?
Yes, yeah, I can hear you. The election petition was, I mean, even before the election petition, there was something that was fascinating about the way the petition itself went to court. For weeks after the elections, one phrase became talk of town: go to court. Go to court became a phrase. Even in friendly circles, if your friend was playing a prank at you or complaining about anything on social media, you just say go to court, because in the political circles after the elections, NDC decided that their strategy was going to be protests. So they did a lot of protests. Some of them turned violent, and people kept on saying to them, if you really believe you were cheated, go to court. And it took quite a while for the party to say go to court. I think the first time I heard that they were going to go to court must have been an interview that Dafia Mekbo had done on the AM show, in which he said, yeah, he knows that the party's legal team are meeting. And eventually the case was filed. And then when the case was filed, it delivered some very interesting moments, didn't it? I mean, famously, we had Rojo Metonunu's tea with biscuits comments, which of course was a highlight for those who didn't want to, get beat down with all the facts and the details, the boring legal jargons that became the daily drudge of the proceedings itself. But in terms of the real substance of what was presented, obviously fell way short of what many people expected. I expected more from the NDCs going to court. I mean, and I see in Ketia's pronouncement before the court that in essence the evidence they brought was not necessarily to challenge the announcement, but it was confusing sometimes, because you kept on asking myself, so really what do you want out of this process, and where's the evidence to back that? And you saw, but I must say something, no NDC person, legal person will admit this publicly. But this is my reading of what happened. I don't think that the NDC went to court necessarily to win a legal battle, to win in a court of competent jurisdiction. Mm-hmm. I think they went there more to win in a court of public opinion, which is sometimes as important, even sometimes more important.
But couldn't they have won that? Couldn't they have won that in the media? Did they have to go to the Supreme Court to win in the court of public opinion?
You definitely. If you go to the court you hold the rest of the country, the rest of the continent, the rest of the world captive for the entire duration of the Supreme Court hearing. Every single day, you had an opportunity in a very good orator like Chachikata to demonstrate why you believe the Ghanaian process is not fair, is not just, and has been rigged. Whether it's backed by the evidence or not, you are sowing a lot of seeds of doubt to in essence win the hearts and minds of people for your side. And that is a very powerful thing sometimes in politics. And I believe that, and did they succeed? Absolutely yes. I mean, I moderated a panel discussion held by the CDD with other African panelists, experts from around the continent, talking about us because they had watched, right? I mean, doubts were created about our system, right? Through that process. There were moments where you begin to scratch your head about some of the things that he said about, really, did this actually go on? And also remember that we had, again, and the EC must take a lot of hate for this. They kept on changing, making mistakes and amending it. That's another thing this year that was unprecedented. I mean, last year, that then fed into the election petition. And what an opportunity to use a court process to rub it in the face of the EC. That is why they so badly wanted Jim Mensah in the door, so badly, so they could really make the point and rub it in. And of course, she did not. She knew that was the end game and didn't make herself available. But they still got an opportunity to do that. That for me was, if you look at it, a political masterstroke in a sense. But if you also look at it in a legal sense, they lost. But we need to ask ourselves, was that really what they wanted? What did they really want? Did they really want a legal victory, or they simply wanted a victory of public opinion?
But did they get that victory? Did they get that victory in the court of public opinion, considering happenings, proceedings, and issues that came up during this whole process? Did they have the evidence to back it? These are some of the questions that came up. So for you, in the court of public opinion, for instance, did they win there?
I mean, listen, we're in a country where the middle class that care about the evidence, the real evidence, the middle class. We're small. We're in a minority. The me and you who've been to school who care, who want to pay attention to the evidence. We're in a minority in terms of numbers. The vast majority of the masses, and remember that the NDC is a mass party, and remember that after the elections, the grassroots, the millions of NDC supporters were baiting for blood. They wanted something so badly. They wanted to be told something. What better way to address that grassroots than to go to court and show them they don't care about the evidence. They care about what the form. They care about the bravado. Me and you who care about, we are not. Look, this was the theater. This was a theater, and the audience primarily were the NDC grassroots. We shouldn't forget that. We a lot of the middle class, me and you, we think, oh, where's the evidence? We keep on asking that question. But for the common NDC grassroots member, they don't care. They just wanted to go to court and get Mr. Chachikata to be as brilliant and flowery with the words and make the whole system look terrible, so the grassroots will know that they have a case. Whether that case is backed by the evidence or not, that's not the point. It's about the propaganda value of what they were doing. And I think there was nothing wrong with that approach. And afterwards, you can ask the NDC whether they got a certain satisfaction from that or not. And they got an opportunity to vilify it. So you create an us against them mentality. Politicians do that a lot, right? You have a similar case in the US where you had Donald Trump having lost the election, saying consistently to his followers that he was cheated.
Yeah.
Why do you think he did that? He knew he didn't have the evidence. He knew, but he had to say it consistently. Got them so worked up, they attack the Capitol Hill. There's a similar template here that played out. So when you ask the question, evidence, what evidence? That's not really what was at play here.
Okay. Well, Winston and Arba, I don't know if you share in that it was really about the court of public opinion, winning in the court of public opinion for the NDC, main reason why they may have actually filed that election petition. For you, Winston, for instance, issues about evidence came up. Did they achieve the very purpose for which reason they went to court?
Well, if you take it from the point of evidence, I mean, it must be stated that, I mean, if you think that the NPP's election petition in 2013 was bad, then the NDC's case of 2021 was worse. Look, and when they went to court, they indicated that they are there to actually, because of the chairperson of the EC's declaration of the elections, and they felt that based on a declaration on the 9th of December 2020, no person had more than 50% of the votes. Let me say that when it comes to the court of public opinion, and I've said this on the Super Morning Show before, and I said that, look, first of all, with Jean Mensah not showing up, the NDC secured a moral victory. Because all the NDC wanted to do actually was just to get Jean Mensah in the door to actually, quote and unquote, embarrass her. The lawyers for the Electoral Commission were very smart. They decided not to get her in there because they felt that, look, the NDC could not prove its case. And I mean, Evans used to the point that was asked the question.
Winston's internet seems to be failing us.
Because we're challenging based on the EC's declaration of the results. And Justice Apau. Can you hear me?
Yes, it's better now. If you could wrap up on that.
Okay. Yes, now Justice Apau, when the day asked the question, he said, based on your calculation, I'm paraphrasing here, based on your calculation, did the president get more than 50%? He said yes. But the Electoral Commission came out with a declaration, and based on that declaration, the president did not get 50%, more than 50% plus one. So for me, I would say that at the time, the NDC, I would agree with Evans, went to court also to energize their base. And you would have seen on social media in part that a lot of the NDC communicators resorted to the unanimous FC, unanimous FC, unanimous FC. The reality on the ground is that, and as one of the judges of the Supreme Court later on said, they were expecting the NDC to come forward with pink sheets that would say, for instance, that this is an indication that we won the election. The NDC did not have that. They were only capitalizing on a technicality of a mistake made by Jean Mensah. And you won't go to court with that and win. Because at the end of it all, if you were to do the calculation, if you were to add everything, it was obvious that that was a slip. And that really, on the face of this, and if you looked at the case the NDC presented in court, MFA, there was no way. There was no way.
Okay.
The NDC was going to win that case.
Okay. Well, Manasseh has also joined. Manasseh has also joined us. Winston, let's quickly wrap up on that. Manasseh has also joined us. And apart from issues about Parliament, petition, COVID, which you've all mentioned, for instance, I don't know if you have a take quickly on the election petition in wrapping up issues that have been raised by Evans and Winston. Then we can bring in Manasseh quickly, because I know corruption will be top on his list as well. Arba, you want to add anything to the election petition?
I agree with what the two heads of.
I get what you did there.
Exactly. I have to say, because we are all left scratching our heads. I've been wondering why the NDC could not provide the information or the evidence that they had given everybody the impression that they had. Everybody was waiting for that evidence, only for the General Secretary to not support his claim. And none of the candidates actually reached the 50+1 threshold to win the. So basically, it is what it is. What Evans said, they played for the cameras and they played for their party base as well.
Okay. Manasseh, welcome. Though very late, that's unlike you. But we've gone through a number of issues. I think COVID is the third biggest for your other colleagues on the panel. Apart from these issues they've raised, what will be your top issues for 2021 worth reviewing?
Well, it has to do with the area of corruption, which I specialize in covering. And on COVID, a number of things happened. We looked at the botched vaccine procurement saga, which after that embarrassing segment in the parliament, our health minister shouldn't be in office if we had a serious or a president who is serious about fighting corruption. We shouldn't have the health minister in office because a lot of things went wrong with that procurement. We are also looking at the issue of COVID-19 expenditure. And I personally investigated the so-called fumigation and disinfection exercises. That was very scandalous. And per our calculation, we got some figures, but we didn't get all. But if we do our calculation, we got about 500 million cedis being spent by the Ministry of Local Government and also the Ministry of Education to do this fumigation exercise, which obviously wasn't effective. We spoke to some scientists at KCCR, University of Ghana, Noguchi, and we realized that this was a scandal because there were a lot of contracts and other existing capacities that could have done the work, even if it was needed. But we ended up spending so much on that. Another issue that really crippled the fight against corruption is how Daniel Domelevo was hounded out of the office before his time. Last year, he was asked to proceed on leave. And when he came, they didn't even have the patience to give him the additional 2 or 3 months to end and leave. And the manner in which it was done, and the most scandalous thing I ever read, is the presidency telling us that, well, Domelevo was working against the interest of the state. So I think that it is such a blow and a dent, not only on us as a people, but also on Akufo-Addo's presidency. Because if you have anybody who is going about sponsoring such scandalous contracts, and I must tell you that the fumigation exercises, I wrote to the education government once to, I heard from the minister that it was an order from the president. We have a lot of these things that happened now on COVID-19, but if you look at how the funds of COVID-19 were spent, it isn't something that anybody should be proud of. And everybody was looking forward to any meaningful audit from the Auditor General to ensure that we're able to hold people who spent our monies accountable. And this is what they did to Domelevo. And I don't think that we can ever take the presidency serious if they want to talk about corruption again.
Okay. Well, so he sets the tone. Issues about corruption when it comes to COVID-19, expenditure amongst others. And Winston, Evans and Arba all mentioned that. But let's start off from here before we get into the issues about the corruption, because after 10 months at home due to COVID-19, schools reopened and there were some instances where we had disregard for safety protocols amongst others. So we'll start all that when it comes to issues about COVID, and then we get into vaccine acquisition, government promising to provide schools with PPE, but many of them did not have it weeks after school reopened. I know also that Evans will have to leave us at some point, but let's quickly watch this and come to issues about COVID and then the vaccine acquisition and the corruption issues that came up.
After several months of break due to COVID-19 pandemic, but these students walking to school are without their nose masks.
Where's your mask?
This is my bag. This is my bag.
So why aren't you wearing it on your way to school?
I intend buying the mask in school. I didn't get some to buy on my way. I will strictly adhere to all the protocols.
It is difficult for me to breathe in the mask, but I wear it. At the entrance of Bomsu School, some students stand at the entrance to enforce hand washing and the wearing of nose mask. Within the school compound, the protocols are observed. Veronica buckets are dotted across campus, but authorities will not allow the team to film. At American Dream Educational Complex, fears of parents were allayed after witnessing the measures in place for the safety of students.
I harbored some fear walking my child to school this morning. The president mentioned that cases continue to rise, so I was disturbed. But seeing the measures in place, I am satisfied.
Thermometer gun check that's how the temperature no higher.
I think we have put in place measures that is going to take care of that. As far as monetary stuff is concerned, we making sure that we pay for whatever we are using as parents. And we've done our PTA virtual meeting on our platforms. On this Sunday, we are going to have a face-to-face PTA, meeting, and we are going to see how best we are going to, sustain this thing.
Protocols are strictly observed in classrooms at the Solid Rock of Ages International School at Bokrom. Classroom sizes have been reduced to between 20 and 25 to ensure social distancing in classrooms.
This was how normal this basic school was when I visited. The new normal was lost on them and it was business as usual. Outside the classrooms, the school pupils treat themselves to some games. In the class 6 of the Iguasi Anglican School, a total of about 40 pupils in the class, and only 2 pupils had their mask on when I visited. I engaged them.
Good morning. How are you? How many of you know about coronavirus? Have you heard of it? Yes. How can we prevent coronavirus from infecting us?
Wearing our masks and sanitizer now.
Okay, but you're not wearing masks, right? Okay, but when you are seated in the class, you're not wearing one. But you want to be infected with coronavirus?
Yes.
Okay, so henceforth, what will you do?
Wear my mask.
Okay, so wear your mask and let me see. Where is your mask? You didn't bring some, or it's in your pocket. Or why have you put your mask in the pocket?
So some sights and scenes setting the tone for us when it comes to COVID-19. A number of us are not adhering to the safety protocols, and we are now experiencing a 4th wave. We've seen issues and heard issues also about the vaccine acquisition. We're hoping to vaccinate 20 million Ghanaians by the end of this year. That is not going to happen anymore. We've extended that target to the first quarter of the year 2022. The Minister of Health mentioned his reasons that he gave, at least at the parliamentary probe, was that he had a mandate to save lives and looking at all the vaccine acquisition challenges. There were no vaccines at the time, so he had to engage middlemen in spite of the WHO warnings for us not to do so. We have a report. Nothing has been done. We heard the president make comments in jest about the minister and how he's suffering in the hands of Ghanaians. Well, Evans will have to leave us, so maybe we should just wrap up with Evans on issues about COVID and this vaccine acquisition. And you mentioned that COVID is tough for you. Let's walk through them. Hello, Evans. Evans, you have to unmute. Okay.
It starts with we started the year with a lot of restrictions that were still in place. And then, I must admit, the first signs that we were dropping the ball came when we saw the president and chief justice, almost everybody else who mattered, go to the funeral of my good friend Sir John and blatantly, broke all the COVID protocols. That sent a very terrible signal. After that, the president could not address the country for a very, very long time, until very recently. And everybody else sort of followed suit from there. And we all, myself included, just simply forgot about COVID. We seem to have been doing fine. And then obviously the vaccine challenge erupted. Vaccines have been found, some effective, some not so. We needed some we didn't afford. And so we had to find ways of getting this done. The health minister claimed he was under pressure. And then some strange reason, we could not deal with country to country, Ghana to Russia, and we had to go through a third party. And the third party then turns out to be a third party with a lot of questions in the past. And it came all the way to bite a lot of people. And we saw what played out. And so Parliament did a good job in terms of investigating this. And the thing that surprised me about that process, the parliamentary investigative process into the Sputnik V vaccine scandal, was the fact that it was bipartisan, but their findings were pretty scathing of the health minister, right? And when it was presented, it was scathing. And you think, okay, so now, yeah, we have a parliament that is working now. But the disappointment was, on the very last day before Parliament had to go on recess, the findings were laid, a decision then was deferred, and they've never returned to it. Never returned to it. So we have a parliamentary probe that did a good job in finding that a lot went wrong, including the fact that the Attorney General's advice was not adhered to, if there was an advice at all. Including the fact that a lot of protocols were breached, constitutional visions, suspicious dealings, all that. And the Parliament had just simply neglected to tell us, okay, so what are you going to do about these findings that you have yourself made? The last time I did an interview on this with the minority spokesperson on health, Minta Kando, he said he was going to file for some question or whatever it is in Parliament to get Parliament to act on this. Nothing has happened. And I think there is a bipartisan complicity in this, obviously from both sides. And for me, that is one that is still unresolved, to the point where the health minister was under so bad pressure. The president was traveling across the country, made a comment jovially, and we saw the health minister proceed on leave, go on, was it leave? It was, yeah, he took some break. And nothing happened. But this is typical Ghana, right? Nothing really happened. There's no, and Manasseh will bear testimony to this better than I can. There really isn't a deterrent. Corruption and potential corruption, whether investigated or not, there's no consequence for it. And so business as usual. Well, but bottom line, now we have enough vaccines. I'm sure the health minister will say, well, look at the vaccines
it paid
that are
off.
in the country. Yeah, look at the vaccines that are applied in the country now. It is as a result of the hard work I put in that you vilified me for. So I'm still waiting for some outcome on this. But I think on the vaccine front, we are doing well. On the Omicron front, not so well. But obviously, more people you vaccinate, the less people you have being hospitalized. So eventually, it turns out okay.
Well, Manasseh, it takes us straight to you. Also on the issues about corruption, you've started already talking about the fact that if this were a serious government, we would have seen something more significant happening to the health minister. But all we got was that comment that the president made about the minister suffering in our hands. Take it away when it comes to issues about corruption for you, when it comes to COVID expenditure, you've mentioned as well. The minority had cause to raise concerns, writing to the Auditor General. We haven't heard much from that letter that they wrote to the Auditor General to investigate the expenditure, especially the hot meals that were told, that were offered amongst others. Let's talk about issues about corruption, especially with COVID. Manasseh?
Well, for when this pandemic hit, I made a post. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. When the pandemic started and there was this frenzy to procure this or that, I made a post on Facebook and said that whenever there's a pandemic, corruption is often endemic. And there were a lot of people who said, well, why was I always looking at the negative side instead of what they were doing to help safeguard lives and all of that? With all that has happened, with the clip you've played and everything, it is very obvious that Ghana was saved by grace. I'm saying this because if the pandemic was to hit Africa like the way it hit the rest of the world, Europe, America, and Asia, we would have been in serious trouble. Fortunately for us, we didn't have that problem. That did not stop our leaders from engaging in very reckless expenditure. It was an election year, and part of the expenditure was made. If you look at this free water, free electricity, and the rest, the pandemic was used for politics. And if you speak to some people in the MPP, they will tell you that, well, COVID-19 was their saving grace. Otherwise, they would have had it difficult explaining to Ghanaians why their lives couldn't change within the 4 years. About the specific expenditures, I have spoken about the strain, which I have done some work and I know much about what went into it. If you look at the procurement of these drugs, the health minister, I don't think, should be able to take any credit about any hard work. The vaccine, I mean, some benevolent countries, some serious countries, some countries with responsible leaders that have been able to manage their resources well, now have money to procure enough vaccines to vaccinate their people, and they are donating those vaccines to us. When the pandemic hit, the very first consignment of PPE and other equipment Ghana had was through a donation, and so it was for many African countries. I have spoken to sources within the Noguchi, and what they said was, at the beginning, a lot of the tests they started doing, they were using equipment and tools from their own existing projects, so that later on they would be replaced. There was a very important opportunity that the government could have engaged Noguchi and KCCR to have done some work and gotten some money to fund their activities. And I'm talking about when we had to even test at the airport. We realized that a certain company that was hurriedly set up, Frontiers Health Services Limited, was engaged under very shady circumstances. As we speak, we at the Fourth Estate have done some work and discovered that Joy FM spoke to Dr. Kofi Bonny. Immediately, it was announced that we're going to charge 150 Ghana cedis to test people for antigen, arriving passengers. Dr. Kofi Bonny of Noguchi said it was too much and that it should cost between $10 and $20 to be able to do antigen tests. The government came out, fought hard, and tried to discredit everything that he said. But as we speak, we have evidence that Leiden, which does COVID-19 testing at East Legon, charges only $16 to do antigen test. So why are we forcing everybody to test with Frontiers that is charging $150? We know ECOWAS heads of state tried to intervene, and they actually got the government of Ghana to reduce the cost of testing from $150 to $50 for ECOWAS citizens. But for citizens of the rest of the world, over 170 other countries, when they are coming to Ghana, everyone is mandated to test at the airport, and with one company that was awarded this contract under very shady and opaque circumstances. We know when the ministers appeared at the vetting committee, almost all of them, when they were asked about this Frontiers contract, they said they didn't know anything about it. So if we can do antigen test in Ghana for $16, and even if they had said, well, let everybody do it at $50, it would have still been high, because we went to about 15 other testing centers across the country. And the highest, apart from Frontiers, charges $41. And there is another testing center at airport which charges $33. But because all those ones are not supposed to be doing the mandatory one, those who travel and come into Ghana, I returned to Ghana, I think in January this year, and I paid $150 to test. So this is also one incidental fumigation scandal that Accra Metropolitan Assembly was being supported by UNESCO, to be able to fumigate and then disinfect certain places.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually they were asked to sit down and fold their arms for Zoomland to come and do it for them to pay. I went to Kwawa Fram Plains North, that's Donko Krom, and then the assembly was fumigating churches. The assembly was fumigating mosques and other private facilities for free.
Mm-hmm.
But when it came to the market, which the assembly had the capacity to fumigate and disinfect, they were asked to stop, so that a contract was awarded in Accra for someone else to go to Donko Krom and do the work which the assembly could have done. I went to the Kumasi Metropolitan Assembly, and they had more than 100 fumigation and disinfection machines. But they were all asked to sit down and allow a certain fraudulent contract to be implemented in their localities. So when now the government is telling us that we have to pay e-levy because COVID-19 destroyed the economy, I think Ghanaians should be asking the critical question. When it mattered most, when we had only 67 ventilators in all public health facilities across a country with over 30 million people, we had only 67 ventilators. Our government wasn't interested in procuring the things that mattered for our health personnel to treat and save lives. They were interested in pouring chlorine solution on streets when there were enough documentations and researches at the time to show that it wasn't effective.
Okay.
Even if that was not there.
And you mentioned that these contracts.
Common sense.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned, Manasseh, earlier that from your checks, which you are still working on, it came up to about 500 million cedis. That's at the last check in terms of the contract and how much it was costing us for these fumigations to be done. We'll interrogate further. But let me bring in Araba also to have her take on issues about corruption. I'll go to Winston because I know Evans has left us at this point because he has to attend to other important issues at this point. But Araba, COVID. Issues surrounding COVID, we've been talking about protocols, we are in a fourth wave, issues about the corruption surrounding COVID-19, especially with the vaccine acquisition. Manasseh is also introducing the issues about fumigation, COVID expenditure especially. What for you about COVID stands out? Is the issue for you?
if you're talking about
okay.
corruption,
Great.
can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Apologies. You often forget to unmute. But if we're talking about corruption, I'd like to continue from where Manasseh left off, specifically with regards to Frontier's healthcare solutions. You know that there have been a lot of questions about this company, which was contracted to do the testing at the airport of passengers. And we know that there have been calls for them to be investigated. I believe that at a point, the health minister was asked, whether the company had a license at the time it was contracted to do the testing. And he said that, no, he actually admitted that they didn't have the license, but then he justified that it was because, at the time when a pandemic, and so those issues were overlooked. I mean, there was a lot of uproar, following that, and there have been calls for this to be investigated. We're here to see whether the special prosecutor has actually begun investigations into this, because what we know now is that the company has accrued up to, I believe, $17 million. Only $1 million has gone to the government of Ghana. So, that's something else we need to be looking at.
Just a bit of information. The amount they've accrued, by the latest calculations we did, it's heading to the range of $80 million US, because the 17 million was only for up to the end of 2020. So this company we are talking about should be able to, if COVID-19 should extend, it should be able to earn enough revenue to have even paid for the Terminal 3 construction and everything.
Well, so how much of that money has gone to government coffers?
The amount that went to government is very minute. I think it's very minute. When the 17 million for last year was raised, I think only 1.1 million went to the government. So what goes to the government by way of the renting of space at the airport is very minute. But a chunk of this money goes to this private company, which is still doing this work, and nobody even is able to tell whether we are getting value for money or not.
And this is why people are calling for investigations into the operations of the company. Who is behind the company? Who is benefiting from this bulk sum that the company is making at the expense of, the state?
Okay, that's for you are the concerns. Winston, what about you when it comes to COVID? Okay, it doesn't look like we have Winston on right now, but so Manasseh has been able to deal with issues about corruption when it comes to COVID-19. You also raised issue about Domelevo, issues about retirement, and finally kicked out of office. And this, for some, was a huge blow to the fight against corruption in the country. Since he left, we haven't really heard much from the Auditor General's department in terms of surcharges, in terms of work that was started by Mr. Daniel Domelevo. You have had cause to be on the same platform with him, for instance, Manasseh. What does everything that has happened when it comes to issues about Auditor General Daniel Domelevo, former Auditor General, I should say, Daniel Domelevo, and our fight against corruption as a country, what really does it say about us?
Well, after he was hounded out of office, I started looking at the audit service in a different light. My trust in that office dipped. Not because without Domelevo we cannot have anybody to do the work, but the circumstances under which his replacement was made. It doesn't create any confidence in that office. And we saw what happened with the latest Auditor General's report. Unlike the surcharge and disallowance, for instance, there was a part of the report that said the 38 newly created assemblies, they paid monies to Zoom Lion, When they hadn't done, the company hadn't done any work, there was really no contract. So that money was not supposed to have been paid, but the money was deducted at source. This is money that the assembly should have taken, but the Auditor General's explanation was that what the assembly said, it would give Zoom Lion additional work to do to cover that money. So like somebody has stolen your money, if you want to put it bluntly, the District Assembly's Common Fund connived with this private company to steal money that belongs to the assembly. If you go to some of these assemblies, their people are still drinking water from the same sources as animals. So these monies could have gone to do something good. Now, the Auditor General has come, they've done the audit and realized that money was stolen from your coffers. Instead of going for that money, they are giving a very disturbing excuse that, well, let a company take the money, but we will see to it that we give this company additional work to do. And if you look at the Auditor General's report, every single one of them on the MMDAs, you will find that the existing contract, Zoomlion doesn't even do them. So if we had a serious Auditor General and Audit Service that is independent enough and was minded to continue with the surcharge and disallowance which Mr. Domelevo started, then those who paid this money that was not supposed to have been paid would have been surcharged. And there was another 95 million Ghana cedis which the Auditor General said the state paid to Zoom Lion without any contract. So all of these and many others point to the fact that, well, there's forces that got Domelevo out are now perhaps very happy that the audit service, the Auditor General, has gone back to the past when it became a ritual that such damning revelations would be made. It would go to the Public Accounts Committee of Parliament, journalists will go and cover them, Ghanaians will be so angry, but after that, nothing happens. Nobody's ever held accountable or responsible for anything. And if what happened to Domelevo, if anybody doesn't want to go through that, then if they come into office as Auditor Generals, then what they would need to do is just to take the boxes of their constitutional mandate, take their salaries, and continue to allow the public press to bleed. So Domelevo's hounding out of office was a very serious blow against the fight in the fight against corruption. And what happened to Martin Amidu even worsened it. We are hoping that at least Mr. Kisia Jabin, who has also been denied funding to do the work he's intending to do, will be able to at least restore some semblance of hope and seriousness in the fight against corruption. Other than that, we are doomed.
The doom that we are not hoping to get to. We're hoping that all measures and interventions will be put in place for such. But speaking of the special prosecutor, he had mentioned at the last media encounter that there are a number of cases that he's hoping to roll out starting January 2022. Falls short of mentioning the exact cases and the persons involved, but hints that from beginning of the year 2022, we are going to know who and who are on his list in terms of prosecutions. Well, your colleagues, Evans and Winston, also outlined issues about Ejura, issues about Galamsey, Fix the Country, issues that pan out at the end of the year 2021. They mentioned the culture of silence, issues that came up also when Sam Jonah had cause to also address the country on issues that came up, and culture of silence was key. And this did not go down well with government and some officials within government on this. But Abba, you have exhausted the issues that were top for you. Manasseh, you've also largely exhausted the issues for you. But this year also, we lost a number of greats. And Rawlings's funeral, I'm sure you all recall, we didn't see that coming. We lost Captain Chikata as well. A number of fallen heroes that I can't even begin to mention. Welcome back. It's still the year in review 2021. It appears that when we talk about death, it hits us. And this year, it didn't end well for the multimedia family. And we can't stop talking about it. We lost the head general manager of Joy Brands, Elvis Kwashi. And thankfully, Arba and Manasseh are with me. And we talked about a number of people that we've lost throughout the year. The last, before we saw the death of Elvis Kwashi, I didn't ever think I'll sit here and talk about the death of Elvis Kwashi, but we saw Captain Chikata also pass, a number of them. Maybe I may have lost count, rather confused at this point as I sit. But Arba, I got to hear some of your fond memories yesterday. Let's hear from Manasseh also. I'm sure there are other deaths that you want to talk about, including that of Elvis Kwashi.
Well, Emma, for one thing about death, yes, one thing about death is that it's when you are far away from it, sometimes it appears that, well, it is one of those pieces of news that isn't pleasant. But when it is close to you, it begins to feel differently. You find it very difficult to even understand. You begin to question God and the essence of our existence and everything. And that is one thing that I'm yet to get over when it comes to the news of Elvis Kwashi. It is almost impossible to reconcile the fact that there's somebody I've known him since 2012. And even after I left, it's like family. Sometimes they bongo won't you look for me, then we chat and all of that. My relationship with the multimedia group started with a call from Elvis in 2012. And I came to meet him and Kofi, and Sunday was the first time I actually entered the Joy FM building. And ever since that meeting, I started work, and Elvis became like my biggest confidant in the multimedia group, because the kind of work I did with the investigative reporting, a lot of the stories weren't even discussed in the meeting, the general meetings. So sometimes for other members of the team, they would get to know what we are working on when the story was ready. But the inception of the very first investigation I did at Joy FM, JIDA, and the platform was later merged into JoyNews with all the stories I did. I didn't come to Joy or the multimedia group as an investigative journalist. My strength was doing rural reporting, developmental journalism. But the first lead or tip-off came, I took it up. I hadn't done investigation. I didn't study it in both my first and master's degrees. But with the guidance of Elvis, we did JIDA. It was a success. And then we proceeded to do quite a number of works. So that's how the relationship was. Of course, at a point, he became like a father or a big brother. Even some of the things are right. And we would argue. I'm the type that if I'm writing and I know I have evidence to call somebody a thief, I wouldn't say it's a dishonest person. Elvis would say, Bongo, tone down, building a brand and all of that. So we would argue, but I largely understood where he came from. And so to wake up one morning and be hit with this news that this person is no more there, it is really painful. One thing I can say about Elvis is that he wasn't the kind of leader who wanted to fight for the spotlight with his people. He would prefer to be in the background, give you all the support, and allow you to take all the credit. Sometimes if you even wanted to mention it, to say, no, it is your story, this, that. He was the kind of leader who wasn't intimidated by the success of his people. And for the kind of work I did at the multimedia group, without the support of people like Elvis Kwashi, I don't think I would have been able to go that far. And so I owe a lot of my investigative journalism career to a man like him. And I can only pray and hope that a good Lord will grant him a peaceful rest and also provide those of us devastated by his demise the needed comfort, and especially to his immediate family, that a good Lord himself should comfort, console, and strengthen them in these trying moments.
Thank you. And what a way to end this particular session. Arba, I don't know if you have anything more to add. Yesterday was very emotional for all of us. So we are still getting used to the fact that Elvis would no more come to us in the newsroom to give us feedback, no matter how brute, no matter how, hard he comes down on us. But something we'll surely miss. I'm sure you would want to add and then finalize and close this session with us.
Yes, MFR. So, listening to all the tributes that have come through, there's one thing that runs through, that people say that he is a professional and he's a gentleman. And those are two traits that you can't take away from him. He's a professional. He'll tell you the truth, whether it's bitter or it's sweet, and he will still be your friend after telling you the hard truth. And so that was Elvis for you. I mean, we've lost a gem. I don't know how we're going to replace somebody like him, but we are. I don't even know the words, but we may be broken now, but we are hopeful that God will grant us the strength to pull through this. Our greatest legacy that we can live is to continue the good works that he taught us, what he said that we should be doing. Always being bold, always being credible, always being fearless. And in doing that, I'm sure that we can carry his legacy on.
All right. Thank you very much, Arba Kumsin, JoyNews editor, Manasseh Azuria-Wuni, editor-in-chief for the Fourth Estate. You also heard earlier Evans Mensah, head of our political desk, and Winston Amwa, who's a deputy head of that desk, and also the Super Morning Show host. When we return, we'll get into the second segment of our show for today, and it's AFCON Build-Up 2022. We'll get to talk sports here on the Pulse. Please stay with us. It's still our year in review, but this time we're doing the AFCON build-up. A lot happened on the sporting front, and I'm talking sports today. George Addo Jr. will join me. He joined me via Zoom. Gary Al Smith will also join me, and once they're with me, I have no fears at all. But I know there are issues with the AFCON. We're hoping to start this AFCON next 2 weeks or so, in some few days. It's January 5, somewhere thereabout. They will give us the exact dates. It's okay if I fail on that. But there have been issues. We know that European teams are unwilling to release their players to us, to African, teams. And we're hoping to get up to how many of them? About 7 of our players are out there, and we're hoping that they'll be released to Milo for us to get ready for the AFCON in Cameroon in 2022. Are we ready for that? We're hoping that FIFA would have an intervention to ensure that these players are released on time as we have requested, but that doesn't look like that is happening. It appears there's some disrespect for African football from the Europeans, and we are hoping to take our place when it comes to that. George joins me. Augustine Ahimful is also a former Black Stars player. Thankfully, he also joins me. We would love to hear his perspective on everything that is happening. Sometime back this year, we were told that we should shift the AFCON to the middle of the year somewhere so that they can, do their things before we can. I don't know how the sporting fraternity is taking it. We're yet to hear from the GFA officially on this. But Mr. Info, thank you very much for your time here on our AFCON build-up this afternoon. I'm sure we've heard others on how incensed they are about issues that have happened prior to our AFCON, which is supposed to happen next year. For you, everything you've monitored, everything you've seen, do you think that we are being treated fairly when it comes to our football as against CAF, FIFA, amongst others?
Thank you very much. Let me first of all say Merry Christmas to all of you. And we are entering a new year. I hope that it becomes a very good one. We should all stay safe because of the COVID. And your preamble suggests that you read a lot about football. So
I try.
it's not only the normal newscasting, but you've read into it. Thank you very much. I believe that the timing of the Nations Cup has always been an issue. And the world is a global village, and so we need to flow with what really is happening. The African Cup in January has always been a problem for the European teams and the South American teams, so to speak. The last Nations Cup was played in June, and we could all see the euphoria and the enthusiasm of which the supporters, players came to the tournament. We've gone back to the heydays where the African Cup is supposed to be played in January. I think that CAF and the people running football in Africa should look at it again and see if we can also go back to, because when the tournament is held in summer, we are likely to have more spectators watching, more people enthused to watch. But when it's played in January, because of the league ongoing in Europe and various places, it has always been a problem. And that is where we face the issues of clubs not willing to release their players. I just read that Watford have refused to release their Nigerian player, Dennis, and so he's not going to go. So we should look at it and see if we can fix the date and fix it well for all of us to enjoy.
The last one was in June. Why then?
The last Nations Cup was held 2019 in June.
I'm saying, then why then the shift back to January?
Because from what I've read and heard, they say it's because the Cameroonian, the tropical nature of Cameroon does not allow the tournament to be played in June, because it will be raining as usual, rainy season around May, June, July, thereabouts. But the last one was held in Egypt 2019, and it was held in summer. And you could see that, I mean, the patronage, the teams that participated, the countries, so to speak, all having their best players available. And then we go back again, because that was the norm. We thought it was going to come off in June, July. And then we go back again to January, and then I think the next one will have to shift again to June. I don't know what CAF really is doing or wants to do. So we, like I stated earlier on, the world has become a global village, and so whatever you do affects somebody. So we need, because all the tournaments that we are likely to see or observed earlier are played in the summer, where most leagues in Europe are off. So it doesn't really, I mean, like stepping on anybody's toe, because the season in Europe and other places are not ongoing. But here we are in January, where, let's take the Premiership for instance, they are at height of the season, in the middle almost of the season, and then you have to lose your top players to go and play the Nations Cup. Yes, we cherish the Nations Cup, but let's all come together and see that, is it right to play it in January, or it will better suit all of us if we should play it in June.
But Mr. Info, the concern for some is that, why should we shift our time to suit those out there? This is the time that we can play it. You rightly mentioned Cameroon as giving the reasons that it's because of the tropical nature. There will be rainy season at the time that everybody thinks is the best, which is summer. But you speak like a former player. If you play out there and you would have to choose between your club and then your national team at the time, where would you stand? It looks like we are putting the players in a situation, a tough situation, aren't we?
You know, before we came into being, most of the players playing in the Nations Cup were locally based, not only Ghana. all over the continent. Only 1 or 2 players had the opportunity to play in Europe. Fast forward, or decades later, most of our best players play in Europe. So it is not a matter of us because we have to change our calendar or cannot change our calendar. Our calendar probably was like that because at the time all the players were based in Africa. So nobody had issues going to have an issue with a club not being or willing to release their players to come and perform for their countries. Fast forward, most of our players are playing in Europe. And therefore, I don't think if you would have been happy if you were paying Augusta Info's salary, and then when you needed Augusta Info had to go and play for his nation. He goes to play for his nation. Unfortunately, when he's injured, he goes back to his club, and the club has to take care of him.
Is that what happens? The national teams, the nation does not take care of them when they get injured, for instance?
I'm sure your colleagues, journalists who are all maybe on this line or on Zoom or whatever, will attest the fact that most of us, when we come to play the national team and we get injured, it is our clubs over there that take care of us. Let's take the recent one. Kudus, we played against South Africa and Cape Coast and he was injured. Who is taking care of him? It's Ajax.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes, it's Ajax. And it's all it. My own colleague, Mohamed Gago, got a major injury, cross ligament injury, which is the ligament that holds the kneecap. He got torn in Burkina Faso 1998 Nations Cup. And it was his club in Italy, Udinese, that took care of him. Not only him, Otoado, who recently is or was our assistant coach, injured himself, Blasters qualifier in Congo thereabout. It was Borussia Dortmund. I can go on and on and on and on. So I am saying that we have all become a village, all of us, a global village. And so we cannot say that because you're Africans, we want our time. So of course, yes, but we are definitely going to step on other people's toes, which is the clubs that are employing these players, that are paying them huge sums of money. To lose them for like 3-4 weeks is easy.
Let me bring in my colleague, George Addo Jr., heads the Joy Sports team together with Gary Al Smith. Well, George, you joined us via Zoom. So this is the controversy as we're faced with. I know you were bringing us all the coverage when it comes to AFCON, but you've heard Augustine Ahemfo. There are concerns about releasing players and the timing of the tournament, amongst others. What's the talk amongst you, really, and how we're hoping to resolve it?
MFR, look, it's fantastic that you have Augustine Ahemfo on the line, and it's important that we also pay attention to what is going through the players, because if I put Mohamed Salah and I gave him a microphone and I wanted him to really speak his mind, the truth is that he'll be thinking, I'm going to the AFCON, I hope I don't get injured because I've got Liverpool to play. And I'm happy that it's coming from Augustine Ahemfo because he has played before, he has mates, they have gone through this thing before. Let me just try and segment this. Number one, the pride issue for Africa is critical. And aside the pragmatic issues that Africa needs to step up to, a lot of Africans are worried that Europeans or the rest of the world is treating the competition with disdain. With that, they are talking about the reportage that there's going to be war, that they have to wear bulletproof, some very, very bad reportage coming in from some of the Western, media they just don't like. So there's a pride issue to try and deal with. We all knew that this Africa Cup of Nations was going to take place in January. It's not something that happened right now. We all knew. So I think that maybe the Africans and all of us were expecting the rest of the world to treat this in a certain manner, not issuing threats. When the European Players Association just issued a threat and said, okay, look, we are not going to release players. We are going to ensure that our players don't come. We are not going to do this. We are not going to do that. Issuing, all sorts of caveats left and right. So I think that the pride issue is there, so that Ian Wright says that he feels that this Africa Cup of Nations is the tournament that is most disrespected in the whole world. He may have a point because of the pride issue. So one, I think the Africans are calling for the Western world to treat the Africa Cup of Nations with respect. Now that's one issue on the side. Now the second issue to deal with is that we have to be pragmatic as a continent and understand what the issues are. So the issues are that when you hold your competition in January, you heavily affect the general football calendar, that is where the players are being paid and where they get their money, where you can say for most of the top stars, where they are being made. So for me, the biggest argument or the biggest case to make is what goes on through the players, or what's going on through the players' mind. How many top stars are ready to give their all at the Africa Cup of Nations, knowing that at the back they may lose a place, they may get injured, they may get that. So that means that Africa would need to look at it and try and answer the question how pragmatic we are.
Okay.
I'm sure when we roll this over and over, we'll get to the point of technology. Is it even really right to say that in this modern day, when you're playing a competition and there's rain, you can't play? I know things like tennis, they've gone for retractable roofs and all of that. So they are huge competitions. But I think that first point, Africa is saying, treat our competition with pride and respect. The way you go about it, if it was Euros or Copa America, go about it the same way if it's Africa. Let us have decorum. Don't just go about and be pushing us around.
Okay.
But then for Africa, we have to be pragmatic.
Okay.
And everything that Augustine has said is right.
Well, I'm sure we'll get to build up more, and I'm really getting excited about the issues that we're talking about. But I have just about 30 seconds to go, Mr. Ahimfo. So if you were a player now, you've mentioned the situation back then when indeed most of you were not playing out there when we were playing in January. But today, if you were still on the field, and I know you manage a lot of players, for instance, if you're managing a player who is out there, like a Pate, for instance, the day are you who have to come, make the choice between your club and now, candidly, what will be your advice?
Doesn't have an option. He doesn't have an option, no.
He doesn't have an option.
No, you don't have an option.
Is Mr. Ahimfo still with me? Mr. Ahimfo, is he still on the line?
I am here.
Okay, so I asked, what will be your advice? You heard the question, didn't you?
Yes, I would definitely choose my country over my team. But the implications thereafter is what we have to look at. Definitely, I'll choose because it's a huge tournament, like George stated. It is a very huge tournament. Let's all come together and see whether hosting the tournament is in January is the right thing to do or not.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I'm grateful, gentlemen, for your time this afternoon, and definitely I'll be watching out for this. I think we should do more of this in our AFCON build-up. And George Addo Jr., Gary Al Smith, Hans Mensando, the team of Town Nabila, amongst others, they will be bringing us all that we need to know when it comes to this particular tournament in Cameroon 2022. You have to stay with us, the Joy Sports team, also on myjoyonline.com. There's more news there. I am MFA Apau. Many thanks for your company. Happy New Year from all of us to you, in spite of our grieving. And to the family of Elvis Kwashi, we're still with you. Rest in peace, Elvis.